All right, we are back on the record in Erickson v. Germantown School District. It is 4:17 p.m. on day 2. Off the record, we discussed the outstanding exhibits, which included R12, R11, R4, and C13. They were all offered and admitted without objection. So that means that all outstanding exhibits and all exhibits, I believe, that have been offered are now admitted. We are going to continue with the respondent's case in chief. Attorney Pollard, I'm assuming you are calling Mr. Novak?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Novak, how do you pronounce your last name?
Just as you are, Novak.
Novak? Okay.
Yep.
I will do my best to get it right. I'm going to ask that you raise your right hand and let me know when it's raised.
Raised.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Michael Nowak. Michaelnowak.
Thank you. And just to confirm, is there anybody with you at the moment?
There is not.
All right. And do you have any documents or anything related to this case in front of you?
Just my own notes.
All right. So what I'll ask you to do is just set those aside. And please don't look at them. I just need you to testify with your firsthand knowledge. And there may be some exhibits that the parties may want to discuss with you. We can deal with that since you're on the phone. And on that note, I also want to note there was no objection to Mr. Nowak appearing by phone. With that, Attorney Pollard, please go ahead with any questioning.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Mr. Nowak. Where are you currently employed?
Germantown School District.
And what is your position with the Germantown School District?
Director of Human Resources.
How long have you been employed in that position?
I've been in this role since 2016.
Prior to 2016, where were you employed?
I was employed in the Franklin School District.
And in what position in Franklin?
High school principal, Franklin High School, 2012 to 2016.
Okay. Prior to 2012, where were you employed?
I was employed in the Waukesha School District, 1992 to 2012.
Okay. What is your highest level of education?
Master's degree.
Great. Thank you. As you know, we're here today in connection with a complaint that was filed by Donald Erickson against the Germantown School District. Are you familiar with this complaint?
Yes.
And are you familiar with Donald Erickson?
Yes.
How did you first become acquainted with Mr. Erickson?
Upon employment in Germantown as a director of human resources, Mr. Erickson supervised the Department of Buildings and Grounds.
Okay. So during your entire tenure with Germantown School District, Mr. Erickson was the supervisor of building and grounds?
Up until the point of his retirement, yes.
Thank you. Who was Mr. Erickson's supervisor?
Initially, Mr. Rick Erickson, followed by Brittany Altendorf.
In your role as director of human resources, were you at all responsible for evaluating Mr. Erickson's job performance?
No.
Okay. In this case, Mr. Erickson has alleged that he submitted a letter to you on February 17, 2021, describing what he called illegal hours of work and hostile work environment. Do you recall receiving this letter?
Yes.
Is it true that around that time, the district had been implementing changes in its policies regarding overtime?
Yes.
What changes were being made?
In, I believe, as the school year began, so the August time period, we were looking very closely at overtime practices in the district. A directive from our Board of Education was to curtail the use of overtime. At the time, we were experiencing a significant budget shortfall of approximately $3 million. That led to an analysis of overtime and, as I said, strong efforts to eliminate, if possible, but minimally to curtail.
And I guess, what was the change in the procedure that was being implemented?
The major change and the major directive to all supervisors was that any overtime needed to have prior approval. So as we worked with our sites, there were situations where historically that didn't happen, and it was just assumed that it was to be allowed. We worked very closely with, in most cases, that meant principals, to develop the practice of an expectation of any overtime needed to be approved by Ms. Altendorf and myself.
Okay. Were those changes well received by district employees?
Not initially. You can imagine a district that had significant use of overtime over the years, and really, in a significantly unmonitored way, or in a manner that didn't require approval, as we're talking about. The switch did take some time, and it was difficult for people to navigate.
So I think you said this change was implemented at the start of the school year in August. That would be 2020 or 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe it was discussed in August, and then it was implemented shortly after that. So it may have been into September.
Is it fair to say this was an ongoing process where the district was reviewing the practice in different departments and buildings and making adjustments over more than a few months?
Yes. As it was initially analyzed and the decision was made to eliminate it, at the time, supervisors likely weren't thinking about all the times during a school year where overtime might occur. So throughout the year, that became a normal practice for there to be communication with our sites or at our district office about what the need for the overtime was, what the necessity was. That was normal communication, and to this day it still is. With that said, we're now at a place where our supervisors, in anticipation of overtime, have begun to proactively look ahead. Example I'll give is one of our principals this past week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, sent us an email about anticipated overtime throughout the course of the year. So in a preemptive way, a proactive way, was trying to get out ahead of what those needs would be.
Thank you. Going back to this letter, the letter on February 17, 2021, do you recall how you received this letter?
I believe I received that letter directly from Mr. Erickson, and there was, I believe, some discussion, but the primary discussion occurred the next day with the superintendent, Dr. Brett Stousland. Mr. Erickson, Mr. Stousland, and I discussed the situation. It was at that time that Mr. Erickson asked that it be rescinded.
He asked that his letter be rescinded.
Correct.
Was it your understanding that he was effectively withdrawing his complaint?
Correct.
even though the letter was rescinded, do you recall taking any action in response to the issues raised in his letter?
Yes, I mean, we were concerned because, it dealt with practice that shouldn't be occurring, and we wanted to know what the bulk of the complaint was. In discussing it with him, it was clear that it dealt with overtime practice, something that we had been discussing on a literal, almost everyday basis with folks both in the district office and throughout. So it was something that we were aware of. His complaint specifically dealt with time being reported and people being asked to pull time off of their timesheets. To which, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, so after that discussion, did the district take any action in response to that issue?
Well, as I said, it's something that we had been dealing with regularly. Mr. Stousland directed Ms. Altendorf to speak with Billy Joe Mon about the situation. To my understanding, that occurred, and there was some rectifying of her timesheet that occurred.
Okay. So I guess after you had this conversation with Mr. Erickson and you understand that there was rectification of Ms. Moan's timesheets, do you recall any other discussion at any time thereafter with Mr. Erickson regarding any wage or overtime issues?
No.
Okay. At any time, did Mr. Erickson ever state to you that he intended to file any type of formal complaint with the Department of Workforce Development related to any type of wage issue?
No.
At any time during your employment with the district, did you ever have any belief that Mr. Erickson intended to or had filed a complaint related to wage or overtime laws?
I did not.
Okay. Taking a step back, I guess, prior to this letter on February 17, 2021, did you, in your role as Director of Human Resources, ever identify any concerns with the maintenance or the building and grounds department or staff?
Again, I will reiterate that that's not a department that I supervise, but throughout the years, I was involved in discussions about shortcomings in the department, concerns in the department, but as someone who didn't supervise, didn't act on them in any way.
When you reference shortcomings in the department, can you give an example of some of those shortcomings?
Sure. There were concerns about work orders not being completed. There were concerns about different aspects of buildings and grounds at sites, and at the board level, questions about status of buildings, cleanliness of buildings, those kinds of things.
Were these types of issues that you've just described things that were going on for, would you say, many years prior to 2020, or were they closer to that time?
They were going on for what I would describe as throughout my entire time in Germantown. I will point out that we were amidst a referendum, significant construction that did put significant stress on the department, and that was often part of those discussions. So in other words, work completion, those kinds of things, was a department that was, taxed significantly during that time.
Did you have any observation, and I guess at this time, I'm talking at any point in time prior to the end of 2020, did you have any observations regarding Mr. Erickson's leadership as supervisor of the Buildings and Grounds Department?
I watched him interact with custodians and members, employees within the department. I watched him interact with district level leadership. On some occasions, I witnessed him elevating his voice in discussions. I recall one conversation in my office with the superintendent that became, and that was the prior superintendent, Jeff Holmes, that became quite heated, where there was yelling back and forth between one another.
Did you have any? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I also recall interacting with him quite frequently with employee situations where HR would need to be involved. Some of those situations were difficult, and I probably spent more time with Mr. Erickson in those situations than other people in the district. So we navigated some difficult things, often challenging, but we did so successfully. Along with that, though, there were times when I observed him, engaging with staff or speaking with his staff in a negative way.
Let me just ask you this. Do after this February 17, 2021 letter was submitted, do you believe, or do you have any reason to believe that the district or Ms. Altendorf or Dr. Stouslin retaliated against Mr. Erickson in any way?
No.
There's been some prior testimony about various letters that had been submitted from the maintenance staff and other employees regarding concerns about Dr. or Mr. Erickson's leadership. Do you have any reason to believe that Brittany Altendorf pressured employees into submitting those letters?
I do not.
Are you aware of the letters I'm referencing?
I can't say that I'm aware of all of them, but I believe that I am. I'm aware of multiple letters, multiple concerns that were raised.
Okay. Were there concerns about Billy Joe? You know who Billy Joe Mon is, correct?
Correct.
Was there any concern about her relationship with Don, I get from a professional standpoint, about whether she was performing work that should have been Mr. Erickson's work?
There were, conversations among staff, employees in the department, which sort of raised that question of, who was directing the department, who was leading the department, what specifically was Billy Joel's role? Was she in some ways acting as, a supervisor of them in the process?
You're aware that Mr. Erickson was eventually put on a performance improvement plan, correct?
Correct.
Were you involved in the creation of that plan?
I was. Leading up to the creation of the plan were many discussions with district leadership, including Ms. Altendorf, myself, Brett Stousland, about performance. Mr. Stousland had concerns about the department, independent of Ms. Altendorf and myself. And, that led to the development of a plan and the desire to improve performance in that department and improve efficiency, effectiveness within that department. And that was the basis for the plan. As that plan was developed, Ms. Altendorf shared its components with me, and I participated in meetings with Mr. Erickson throughout the course of that year, really.
I guess around that time, when he was put on the performance improvement plan, what were your, I guess, concerns about Mr. Erickson's performance as the supervisor of building and grounds?
Well, my concerns were that, as I referenced work orders, there was a significant backlog on work orders. Our principals were not satisfied with work being completed. There were questions about the efficiency of the department relative to time, how time was being spent. As someone, again, who worked very, very closely with Mr. Erickson, probably closer than other district administrators, at the point of the plan, I recall, looking at it very objectively and recognizing that, in this case, our superintendent, our business director had very legitimate concerns that warranted the development and implementation of a plan. That was discussed thoroughly, and as I worked through it again, it's having gone through many plans with employees, both as a principal and as a director of human resources. It's a delicate process, and in this case, because it was someone I had worked with very closely, required me to be very, very focused relative to the objectivity of the process and the desired outcomes that were being sought.
Got you. I think you had mentioned there were concerns of the superintendent that were independent of your and Ms. Altendorf's concerns. Is that accurate?
That is.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there were just comments about the cleanliness of the buildings, overall kind of confidence in the work that was being performed and carried out. And that was not, like an isolated incident. Here and there, it was something that recurred in an ongoing manner to the point that it resulted in movement to a plan.
And ultimately, go ahead.
If I remember correctly, I believe one of those meetings with the superintendent was scheduled and occurred immediately after, meaning a day or two after the discussion that was referenced earlier in terms of the whistleblower complaint and the three conversations that we had. The conversation that was had with the three of us, sorry.
After Mr. Erickson was put on this performance improvement plan, are you aware, was he able to improve his performance?
Well, we met on a regular basis, and much of the conversation dealt with execution and process and becoming a more process-driven department. And I personally didn't see that result. My sense was this was an employee who was attending our meetings and, was trying to check boxes relative to things that were being asked, but wasn't taking them into the field, wasn't putting them into practice. As part of that, there was an awful lot of discussion about how that would be done, the obstacles, the uncertainty about how to proceed, but ultimately, I didn't see success in that regard.
Do you believe that Mr. Erickson was receptive to making changes?
In our meetings, he was receptive to the idea of change. I recall some separate conversations that he and I had, demonstrating that he had interest in seeing those changes. In some regards, who wouldn't want to improve, who wouldn't want to see, improvements in their department, but desiring them and actually making them happen are two different things.
You don't have it in front of you, but there has been an exhibit presented, which is, I believe, been submitted as Exhibit R8, which is an email from you to Mr. Erickson dated April 19, 2022. And for your benefit, I'll read the first. It says, "Good evening, Don. On Monday, April 11th, you met with Ms. Brittany Altendorf, Director of Business Services, and me to discuss the options presented to you with respect to your employment at the Germantown School District. At the meeting on April 11th, you refused to choose either of the options presented to you. You also refused to discuss any aspect of your employment with us and continually stated no comment. Please understand that your refusal to discuss your employment status hinders and interferes with our ability to plan and make important decisions regarding district operations." There's more to the letter, but do you recall writing this email?
I do.
Do you recall meeting with Don on April 11, 2022?
I do.
Was it problematic to you at that time that Mr. Erickson was refusing to discuss any of these issues with you?
It was problematic. We as you can imagine, wanted to converse with him about, next steps and whatnot. It was our definite interest in him staying on in a different capacity. He would not engage in that discussion at any point. Our intention, this is a long-standing employee, again, someone who I personally have had many productive and good conversations with and done some significant work with. The interest was, if at all possible, keeping him in the department in a different role.
Understood. And it looks like then you end the letter stating, "We will be contacting you to schedule a meeting prior to May 1, 2022 to discuss your new job duties and responsibilities in more detail." Were you ever able to have a meeting with Mr. Erickson to discuss his new job duties?
No, without the dates in front of me, I believe that he resigned or retired, announced that he was going to retire prior to us having a meeting of that nature.
Understood. Okay. And at any time around this April 2022 email, or around the time that you were having these discussions regarding a change in his position, was there any discussion between you, or Dr. Stousland or Brittany Altendorf or anybody else at the district related to Mr. Erickson having submitted a letter more than a year previously on February 17, 2021 regarding this overtime issue?
No, the entire process focused on effectiveness as a leader in that department.
Did you have any concern at that time that Mr. Erickson intended to file a complaint with the Department of Workforce Development regarding unpaid wages or unpaid overtime?
No, my entire focus was on the situation at hand, his employment throughout the process of the plan of improvement, was the steps that we were discussing, the needs that we were discussing, and our interest in seeing improvement relative to efficiency and effectiveness in the department.
Thank you, Mr. Novak. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Mr. Erickson's attorney may have some questions for you now.
I may.
Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, before we jump into Cross, I just want to note we were discussing R8. That is actually admitted as C7. They're identical documents.
Yep.
Thank you,
Okay.
Judge.
I
Go ahead,
saw that
Attorney
on your
Hitchcock-Cross.
face. I knew that was coming. Okay. Mr. Nowak, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And your job as HR director, were you in charge of determining making sure that the district followed state and federal law with regard to paying their employees?
Along with the director of business, yes.
Oh, okay. So if she testified that she didn't, Ms. Altendorf testified that she didn't have any part in that, in supervising that, would that be true or false, do you think?
Well, I think ultimately it would land with human resources, but the payroll department plays a big hand in that. When we have these situations, we typically work collaboratively.
Okay. And while you were head of HR, did I understand you correctly that you determined that the district was not paying overtime when it should be paying overtime? Is that fair?
No.
Oh, okay. So was there a directive from the superintendent to you and Ms. Altendorf to pay out certain administrative assistants?
Oh, if that's what you're asking, as part of that process, there was discussion about the practice, and as I used the term earlier, situation was rectified.
Oh, okay. So before it was rectified, was there a problem or something else?
Well, the process was going through a change. The key in that process was approval, and that was, I would say, the primary focus.
Sir, can you answer my question, only my question, and which is this? Before you rectified the issue, you'll agree with me that there was a problem because the district was not paying its employees the overtime that they were owed, right?
Can you explain the dates that you're referencing?
No, you know when you paid Miss Mon overtime, right?
Object to
Yeah.
the question is vague as to time period.
Okay, so you do know that.
Hold on. So I'm going to overrule the objection, and the witness answered yes, that he is aware of that.
Okay, so based on the fact that you're aware of that, sir, you're also aware that prior to that time, you hadn't paid out overtime, correct?
Again, I asked for specification with time. If you're talking about the time from us changing.
Sir, I'm going to interrupt you because I just don't have time for that. I'm going to be very clear with that. You're saying to us that after 2/17 of 2021, we've had testimony, and I think you had said that as well, that the superintendent directed you and Ms. Altendorf to pay out employees overtime, correct, or something else?
Correct.
Okay, so after you were directed, did you pay that out of the goodness of your heart or for some other reason?
Because it was the right thing to do.
Oh, okay, but also because it was the law or something else?
Correct.
Okay, So before you complied with the law, we can agree that you were out of compliance with the law, right?
Object to the question. You're asking the witness for a legal conclusion.
No.
I'm gonna, well, it is asking him if they were breaking the law, and it's a legal conclusion that he may not have the foundation to testify to, and I don't think he does. So,
Well, so he just waived that. If you just let me have the opportunity to respond first before making a decision.
go ahead.
Sure, and it's simply this. He just said that that they paid them because of the law. So that's, if that's not a legal determination, I don't know what is. That was waived by that gentleman over there. Then we got to the next question with, then he'll admit then that if he did it because of the law, that he was out of compliance with the law. So that's all we're trying to get to. It's not anything, we're not
That's the-
asking for illegal.
Same objection.
And so I'm going to sustain it because I don't know what his understanding of the law is, the basis of the law, or if he has any expertise in this law.
Oh, okay. Sir, Mr. Novak, do you know about the overtime requirements under state and federal law?
Yes. And
Okay.
as-
How did
as
you come to
part of-
to know of that?
through training and through experience. In the
Okay, and part of your job as HR director was to help make sure that the district is enforcing those laws, right? And following those laws, right?
The starting point to that, though, is
Can you just
grant-
answer my question? Yeah, is it simply yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you were one of the people, let me just ask you this, did you supervise your administrative assistant?
Yes,
And did you review her timesheets?
I did.
Okay, and what, you paid her out overtime, didn't you?
We paid out overtime when it was approved.
To your administrative assistant under the orders of the superintendent or something else?
Approval from the superintendent, Ms. Altendorf, and myself in situations that warranted overtime, and it was approved.
Did the superintendent direct you to pay your administrative assistant overtime after Mr. Erickson sent you the letter informing you of your illegal practices?
No,
Ah, okay. So you're saying your administrative assistant never had a surfeit of overtime, is that right?
can you repeat the question?
Sure. Did your administrative assistant incur overtime?
My administrative assistant asked for approval for overtime, which was granted. At the
Okay.
beginning of the
Okay. So, but we're clear, and let me ask you this, and if I misunderstood you, I understood you testified earlier that people's timesheets were changed, right? District employees' timesheets were being changed?
I don't recall saying that.
Oh, okay. I've got a note here saying that they were being changed. Did I misunderstand something or time off the timesheets? Did I misunderstand that?
If you can explain to me what you believe or heard, please do.
When did you first become aware that district employees were changing their timesheets because of overtime?
I wasn't. The process involved seeking approval. Timesheets are approved by supervisors. To our knowledge, at the time, those timesheets reflected things that were approved by supervisors.
Okay, so, and help me understand this. How is it and why is it that the district paid out overtime on the instructions of the superintendent after Mr. Erickson sent you a letter? Can you explain that to me?
Sure, because in seeking information from, in this case, Billy Joe, there was, I believe, discussion with Ms. Altendorf around that overtime and the need to accurately pay out what was worked.
Okay, so now you acknowledge that there was overtime that was needed to be paid that hadn't been paid, right?
Correct.
Okay, and when did you first learn of this fact?
Well, this is an ongoing process. right? And
What did you learn of this before or after February 17th of 2021?
before,
Oh, okay. What steps did you take to rectify this process before Mr. Erickson told you about it?
working with supervisors around the approval process. In some cases, work was performed and not properly approved. It was a process that we were not used to following. And as we gained familiarity with that process, it was followed.
Great. Did you ever instruct any of your subordinates to pay their employees for overtime that had been taken off of employees' timesheets?
Not to my knowledge.
Why not?
I don't recall.
What would help you recall?
Individual conversations, context to situations.
Great. Okay. And just to be clear, you were understood that there was time being taken off of people's timesheets. Did you ever inform the superintendent of that fact?
Objection, you're mistaken the witness's testimony. He never acknowledged that occurred.
I think he's done it twice now. Sir, did you ever tell anybody that you were aware that time was being changed on people's timesheets, like the superintendent?
No,
Why not?
because as part of the process, the first question is to decide whether or not it was approved, to speak with supervisors about the situation. One of the things that was occurring was that people were putting time on timesheets without that approval.
And are you aware of policy 1000, sir?
Not off the top of my head, sir.
Oh, okay. Do you think that the department has a whistleblower policy at any time?
Excuse me?
Yeah, do they have a whistleblower policy? What's your knowledge of that whistleblower policy?
My knowledge is it's a policy put in place to allow people to report things.
Okay. And do you believe that it requires you, sir, as head of HR, to report to your supervisor any violations or suspected violations of state or federal law?
Yes.
Okay. And so do you believe taking that and made it incumbent upon you or required you, sir, to tell your superintendent of the fact that you were aware that people's timesheets were being changed?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Didn't that policy require you to tell your superintendent of the violation of or suspected violation of the law?
Objection, assuming facts not in evidence.
I'm not going to even argue that one, Judge.
I'm not sure. So I understand why we're getting into the policy to an extent, but the question isn't whether they actually violated a policy. It's whether they believed that he was going to file a complaint when they made the decision to demote him.
Fine. And I'll wrap this up with one other question then. Sir, Mr. Novak, so it's true then that you were aware that the district was violating state and federal law. And it's also true that you didn't tell your supervisor. And it's also true that Mr. Erickson told your supervisor, correct?
Objection, you've asked three different questions in one question. Can you please
I've asked,
separate
is
them?
all those things, three things true? If they're not all true, please tell me, sir.
They're not all true.
Oh, okay. So it's true, isn't it true that Mr. Erickson notified you of state and federal law violations?
He did.
Okay. It's also true that you're aware that time was being taken off the timesheets, right?
As I stated earlier, the overtime change or practice that we instituted required prior approval.
I'll
was
keep
a
that in mind for
process
future reference. Can you just answer my question? You were aware that people's time was being taken off the timesheets, correct?
I'm aware that timesheets were analyzed relative to the question of whether or not time was approved.
Okay, and you were aware of that before Mr. Erickson made his complaint to you, right?
I think I mentioned earlier, we talked about overtime very frequently.
Okay, so therefore, and it's also true that you didn't tell your supervisor contrary to policy, right?
I would say we engaged in conversation about overtime practices frequently.
So
that
I'm
involved trying to get it right relative to the need for overtime to be approved.
I'll keep that in mind for future reference. So it's also true that you had a motive to go after Mr. Erickson to keep your boss from knowing that what you knew about the malfeasance going on with overtime that you and Ms. Altendorf were engaged in, right?
That is not true.
And his supervisor is Mr. Stousland, who was aware of this report. He met with, you're totally misstating the evidence.
No, I'm not misstating what we've gone over 3 times, which is simply this, that he was aware that people were time was being taken off of people's timesheets before Mr. Erickson reported it. And that he didn't tell his supervisor before Mr. Erickson reported it, and that the supervisor learned of it when Mr. Erickson reported it. So let's be clear on what we do know here, sir. I have no more questions.
Testifying today.
If you want to testify,
none of those
you
statements
can
have
call
been.
yourself.
All right, hold on. Let's continue with questioning.
So we're done. We rest.
All right, Attorney Pollard, do you have any follow-up?
No, Judge.
All right, Mr. Novak, thank you for your time. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Novak.
Attorney Pollard, does the respondent have any further witnesses?
No, Judge.
All right, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, do you intend to call a rebuttal witness?
No, thank you.
All right, then we can close the record. All of the exhibits that have been offered have been admitted. I do want to address the DWD complaint issue, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, that you brought up off the record. I don't want to forget to do that, but I do want to run through the exhibits quickly, simply because we're on the record and I want to make sure that
You're killing me, Judge, but no problem.
I will be very quick. So here are the exhibits that are admitted, and they're not in any particular order other than when they were offered. C18, C12, C2, R3, C20, C1, C4, C6, C7, R5, C17, R12, R6, C15, R9, R15, R11, R4, and C13.
That's right.
All right, and then Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, you wanted to discuss the issue of potential DWD complaints and leave presumably the record open for approximately a week.
Yeah, so that's here. My understanding is that the witnesses have said there was no DWD complaints. It's my understanding that there may be. We would, because you can take judicial notice of them, and because of other rules in 227, we suggest an opportunity of 7 days from today to allow us to submit those to you if they exist.
And Attorney Pollard, do you have any issue with that?
I do, Judge. I mean, I don't know why those complaints wouldn't have been on the respondent or the complainant's exhibit list.
Attorney Hitchcock-Cross?
Yeah, my response to that is that they would have been in rebuttal, and we hadn't, I mean, until they denied it, we didn't realize that was an issue at all.
And I agree with Attorney Hitchcock-Cross on that point. I don't know if you could anticipate that they wouldn't testify. There wouldn't be any. I will tell you, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, I don't have access to all DWD complaints. So what I'll do, I'll leave the record open for 7 days if there's some to submit. Attorney Pollard, at that point, I think what would make sense is we can do this by email, but if there's a need to recall any witnesses for rebuttal, we can do that. That I'll leave that up to have that discussion if and when something's filed.
Do you want me to excuse me, Judge, do you want me to submit them to Mr. Pollard first?
I think if you do it simultaneously, that should be fine.
Great.
Can we do that by Wednesday, the 16th? Is that enough time?
Yes, Judge.
All right. And then do the parties want to engage in any post-hearing briefing?
No, Judge.
I think we would like to, especially if there's going to be additional exhibits being offered. We definitely would like to.
Can we set that schedule by email after in a week from today?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So we'll set, so once anything else is submitted, the record will close at 4:30 on, excuse me, hold on one moment. I'm in the wrong month.
17th is going to be the 22nd, Judge.
Yeah. Why don't we do the 23rd of Friday? Just to
Okay.
make it a little bit easier. So we'll do, next Friday, August 23rd. The record will close at 4:30. We can take up any exhibits at that point, any submitted exhibits at that point, and any briefing that the parties want to engage in.
Perfect. All right. Pleasure.
I'm sorry,
seeing you
Judge,
all tomorrow.
I'm not totally following this. We have until Friday, August 23rd to update the record.
No, so it seems that Attorney Hitchcock Cross, the complainant wants an opportunity to file if there are DWD complaints out there that would have been filed during the time period that the witnesses testified there were none. He wants that opportunity to file essentially as impeachment evidence, is what I understand it to be. At that point,
can we have the same time period to offer any additional impeachment evidence?
if there, I guess I don't know of any other impeachment evidence. Attorney Hitchcock Cross, do you have an issue with that? And then if we need to, we can circle back and deal with rebuttal witnesses.
It's going to open a whole can. I think the best course is to just leave it then. Because that's going to open a whole can of worms one way or the other. I'm certainly have larger objections. I get his point here, and maybe it's not fair to settle this here now. But if that's the outcome, I think then nothing would be preferable.
Should then I guess should we close the record at this point?
If that's where we're leaning, then yes.
Yeah,
I think I would like to do that, Judge.
All right, then why don't we, if we're going to close the record, if Attorney Pollard, it seems you want to engage in a post-hearing briefing.
Yes, Judge.
All right.
Judge, I'm in the middle of, I've got like 2 summary judgments pending right now. I got like 5 things, and can we I agree we should
can push it out.
Yes.
How far out would you like to push it?
That's what I don't have my calendar in front of me. I'm really in a tight spot here, but I can respond first thing in the morning, no problem.
All right, so we'll and I'm fine pushing it out. We'll deal with it by email tomorrow morning. I realize Attorney Hitchcock Cross, you've got to run. I appreciate the time for staying. I'll send an email with proposed post-hearing briefing date tomorrow morning. And I assume both parties would like a copy of the recording.
Yes, please.
So I'll confirm that that's being sent. That'll come from someone within the department, but I'll confirm that as well. All right, with that then, the record is closed and we are, well, at least in terms of evidence, and we are off the record for today.
Pleasure working with all of you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.